This is Tom from Cognitive Dissonance.
And this is Cecil from the same podcast.
And we are forced at near gunpoint, or the simple request of David Michael, to congratulate him because you know something is genuine and heartfelt when it is directly solicited.
Yeah, when he goes out of his way to say, "Hey guys, is there any way you can find it in your heart of hearts to congratulate me on this amazing accomplishment?" And what accomplishment are we congratulating David Michael on?
Yeah, so at his request, we are pulling his dick at the moment because he has actually managed, and drum roll please, to read one f***ing book.
Yay!
A whole book!
That's amazing.
Now, to be fair, I think it took him more than a year to read a book.
So he finally finished Green Eggs and Ham.
Yeah.
Congratulations on reading Green Eggs and Ham, Sam I Am.
It turns out in the end, he likes the green eggs and ham.
It's kind of one of those. It's one of those feel-good stories.
You just had to try it.
You
just had to try it.
Gotta try something. No, he finished a book, Tom.
He finished the Book of Mormon.
Book of Mormon. Wow, that's amazing. I mean, really.
I mean, it's just the Cliff Notes, I think. It was just the annotated version.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, congratulations on your book reading.
Yeah,
and
man,
what I mean to say is your book reading, like your singular book.
Actual book. Now you can dust off your single book shelf.
Wow.
Yeah. It won't take you long because it's just for the one book. And, put that one proudly upon display, knowing that you've reached at least 2 major milestones with your show. Your parents have decided to listen, which is great. I mean, now you've got, maybe a half a dozen folks listening.
Yeah.
And and I don't know what they're going to listen to now, though, because you finished the book.
Right.
But you've also managed to raise $3,000 for a very worthwhile cause to go toward helping to fund atheists who are in need of mental health counseling. And I think that's tremendous. That's literally, knowing you, David, that's the one good thing you've done with your life.
It's amazing. It is the one thing. Also, recently, he's had another milestone, Tom. I think you might have missed this. He's partnered with Open Stories Foundation. And those are the people on the other side of the glory hole. So
I don't know if that's a partnership.
It's really a one-way relationship, it turns out. Well, congratulations on all your milestones, David, and be sure to bronze the Book of Mormon as the first book you've ever read.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Don't ever change, David.
Congratulations.
Hey, this is Professor Stephen.
And this is Rachel Nannon Brown.
From Atheists on Air, and we're just calling in to say congratulations.
Kick-ass job.
Yes, congratulations for finishing that terrible fucking book.
Terrible.
I don't see how you actually did it, but now you've got 2 more to do. The Pearl of Great Price and the Doctrine of Covenants. Have fun with that. And if you want to hear anything else from heathens besides making fun of the Book of Mormon, you can catch us on Atheists on Air. Just look us up. We're there, AOA.fm.
Hello, listeners of my Book of Morons podcast. Ray Comfort here from Living Waters, a moron-free zone. Occasionally you can hear some of my behind-the-scenes work at herdmentalitypodcast.com. I just thought I'd take a few short minutes out of my hectic preaching schedule to send a message to David, and what a fine biblical name it is too. David, you've done some fantastic work using your literacy to read a ridiculous book, and hopefully, when you've recovered, you can pop over and visit me and Raylene at Living Waters, and then have a brief go on the 8-horsepower solid gold butt plug to celebrate. And before you go critiquing my book, called The Bible, it helps if you believe it all before you even start, or better yet, just believe it and don't read it at all. But, good job, as you were.
Welcome back to another episode of My Book of Mormon. This will be episode 82. This is the first time that we've had an episode where there is no reading involved. So I gotta be honest, up until now, I've kind of gone into each of these episodes knowing exactly what I'm going to do, right? I'm going to read whatever's next in the book. This time I don't have that luxury. So I've been racking my brain about exactly how to do this episode, right? I know a lot of you have written in saying that you wanted some sort of recap, what my thoughts over the entire book were. Now that I'm done, I'm going to do my best to kind of accomplish all of that. And to be honest, I made several attempts at this. So I at one point was doing quite a bit of research to try and like look back and see if I could pull things out. And I started to record and it didn't sound right. It just didn't sound like me. I even tried to kind of script some stuff and that didn't really work. And so then I kind of realized, you know what? I've done the entire show all this time, just me shooting from the hip. So maybe I should just go into it unprepared, right? And just, so that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm just going to go for it and see what this sounds like. Hopefully it works because I'm kind of out of time. I tried some things earlier in the week and they just didn't work. So yeah, we're going to make an attempt to recap this book and tell you what final thoughts before we move on to the next book. All right. Before we get into that, of course, we do have quite a few people to thank. So this week, I'm going to thank 3 new Real Mimos. We have Real Mimo Mike, Real Mimo Bill Hasha, and Real Mimo Suncrest 45. So to all 3 of you, thank you so much. Welcome to being Real Mimos. We also have 2 new Mimo priestesses. We have Priestess Belle and Priestess Catherine Carter. So thank you to both of you. Welcome to being priestesses. I think it's awesome you guys decided to jump on board. And then we have 2 new Mimo priests. That's right, quite a few this week, right? So we have Priest Jay Mumford, and we have Priest Jeff Davis. And Priest Jeff, just like Real Mimo Adam, decided to do a catch-up donation. So he, donated for every episode that he had missed so far. So I love that new tradition. So Real Mimo Adam, thanks for starting the trend there. Hopefully more people jump on board, because that's awesome. So anyway, to all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of you, thank you so much. That is awesome, and thanks to everybody that's been contributing up till now. All right. So, okay, so that's all the thanks. And as always, I'm, very thankful. No. All right. So now we, have to get into this book. Before I actually start talking about, the book itself, what I thought of it, I do kind of want to address something about this Moroni promise, right? So quite a bit of feedback on that. Some people were just delighted by it. Some people thought it was one of the best things I'd ever done on the show, but some others were kind of, I don't know, didn't care for it as much, I guess you could say. So, and those did tend to come from, the believing listeners, which turns out there's more than I thought there were, to be honest, because I got quite a bit of, messages, Facebook posts, comments on the website that, seem to come from, TBMs. And, for those that don't know, true believing Mormons, and, so different feedback. Some of it was somewhat strange, I thought, this whole idea of, you have to have faith that it's real before you ask, and then you'll get a sign that it's real, but kind of seems to defeat the purpose. But anyway, one thing that I wanted to point out was that a lot of people kind of had this, too bad you didn't deconvert me, right? Like people are like, I still believe even after you read the whole book. And I'm like, well, that was never my intent, right? And I want to be really clear about that. Never once did I go into this project thinking, gee, I'm going to try and deconvert Mormons out of Mormonism. That's up to you. You know what I mean? I never, made that a mission of the show. No, it happened. Some people wrote in and said that happened to them. Personally, I think that, that was probably going to happen regardless, right? My guess there that, if this show, was the final blow that got you to question your faith, you were probably wavering anyway. And maybe you weren't, but I think that if it wasn't this, it would have been something else. So whatever. I just want to be really clear. If you're listening to this show and you're a Mormon, that's fine. I've no problem with that. I'm not judging you. I'm not saying, it's just this, you're listening to hear what I have to say, but I'm making no judgment on what you have to say. So just wanted to kind of clear the air on that. But with that being said, if there's one thing I would challenge you on, and when I say you, I mean, I guess some of the people that left comments, there was someone actually mentioned that they refuse to believe in a world without, God in it, right? Or something along those lines. That, I just refuse to believe it. And that, I think, is the one big difference between us. I would never refuse to believe in anything. If you present evidence that something's true, I will take a look and I will evaluate it and, very likely accept it as truth if the, evidence is compelling. And there is no topic where that does not apply, right? It's, and I imagine in anything in life, as long as there's enough evidence for something, you'll believe it, right? If I can show it to you and you can be like, oh, I guess that is true. But there's this thing with faith that once people kind of latch on to a belief of a God or a deity or some type of worldview, they just kind of think, this is it, nothing else. There's no evidence that's going to shake me from this. And that, I think, is I don't know. I think it's short-sighted. It's limiting to say that, essentially you're just going to block out any evidence that might shake your faith, right? And I think you'd be more honest with yourself if you would just say, you know what, it's okay. If this is truth, then it should be okay for me to have doubts and to look into them and find out if it is true or not. So this refusal to believe or refusal to not believe, to me, is something I don't understand. I don't understand why you would lock into something that strongly, regardless of what the evidence says. So I don't know. That's probably the biggest difference between us. But onto this one other comment that said that a worldview without an afterlife is somehow bleak and I don't want to live in a world where there's no heaven or something like that. For me, I've always said this. I don't want there to be a heaven. The afterlife concept, I don't understand it. Like, why would anyone want to live for eternity? That just seems to me to be just something that doesn't sound fun, right? And I don't care how great it is. Anything for forever would just become, you would just go insane, I would think. But anyway, the idea that a lot of people have this, that if there's no afterlife, that means this life is it, and isn't that depressing? And no, I don't think it's depressing at all. I think it's actually quite awesome when you think about, the responsibility that's been bestowed upon us, right? In the entire universe, we're not aware of any other creature in the whole cosmos that actually has sentience, right? That's aware of itself. And essentially what that means is that we give the universe meaning, right? Like, without us, the universe doesn't feel. The universe doesn't have thoughts. The universe has no purpose. It just simply exists and has a series of chemical reactions that it goes through. And we are the end state, or at least the most current state, of a vast series of chemical reactions that have been happening for billions of years. And here we are. The universe, evolved in a way that we exist. And so we get to give the universe a purpose. That, to me, is awesome. And it's more than enough reason for a life. And so I look at it as we each get one shot to kind of write our own chapter in the meaning of the universe. And, and I think that, to me, is way more rewarding than looking at this life as some sort of just a little experiment, just a little trial run before the afterlife. It just doesn't, that to me just makes life smaller, right? Makes it not as important if it's, if this is just some sort of test, right? Instead of it. So anyway, that's how I look at it. Hopefully that clears up any confusion people had about my, my worldview, my, how I feel about there not being an afterlife and how I'm at peace with that. I'll stop talking about it. I don't want to get into this whole theological conversation. We need to talk about the Book of Mormon. So probably the best thing to do before we get into the actual, what I thought about the whole thing, it might be better just to recap it all, right? Just go through a quick, what did this book have to say? The really fast Cliff Note version. Okay. So if you guys remember, this whole thing started out, with this fella named Lehi, and, he had a dream, and for whatever reason, we never really understood why, but Lehi believed that his dreams meant something, right? He believed that if he had some wacky dream, it must have been God talking to him. So he had this dream and told everybody, that they were in Israel, right? He told everyone in Israel, yeah, you're all sinners. You're all going to die. And they didn't care for that. They kicked him out of town. And so he took his family, left town. His couple sons, or 4, I guess. 2 of the sons, Laman and Lemuel, they just didn't, they thought this was insane. They're like, Dad, what are you talking about? Dreams don't mean anything. But then Nephi and Sam, they were on board. Nephi was kind of on board. Let's be clear about that. Nephi, he needed some evidence. So he's like, God, give me some evidence. God actually came down and talked to Nephi. He got his evidence. That's great. So, once again, I don't give, Nephi any points for having faith, because he didn't. He needed evidence, which he got. So good for him. Anyway, I just refuse to give people credit for faith when they had evidence, but whatever. So then, Laman and Lemuel, they didn't believe in it. Now, this is a running theme throughout the book that, or at least the early part of the book, that Laman and Lemuel themselves get evidence left and right. So angels come down and talk to them. They get shocked. They get knocked over. They're in a sea of the giant storm is going to kill them all. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how much evidence they get. They just don't care. They just ignore it. Right? We've never quite understood why. Well, they don't ignore it. They repent for a minute, but then they come back. So weird characters there. They don't make a whole lot of sense. Anyway. So, they for some reason they have to go get these brass plates from Laban. And so they go back to Jerusalem, through a little back and forth. Laban doesn't want to give him up. Eventually, Nephi has to chop off his head because God commands him to, even though Nephi didn't want to. Gets the plates. So let's start there. First part where I want to say I don't get, and that is why these plates were so significant. So everything I know about Jewish history or the history of the Israelite people was that they had a very strong oral tradition, right? So everyone there knew about Moses and Abraham, Isaac, and all those guys, right? They all knew those stories. They were raised with them. They were told with them. But apparently they were also written down on these plates. And for some reason, they acted like if they didn't have these plates, they wouldn't know the stories, right? Because even after they stole them, they sat down, Lehi read them, and he's like, check it out. There's the story of Adam and Eve. Who knew? And it's like, what? How did you not know that? All of you should know that. So anyway, that was weird. But they went to all this trouble to get it, murdered a man to get them, and so they had the plates. And again, the significance of them continues to be lost on me. Because it wasn't like, and that Joseph Smith translated those plates, right? He never did. It's just that, Lehi had them. So whatever. All right. So they wander around the wilderness for a while, lots of back and forth. They Ishmael comes out with them. Zoram they kidnap, right? Ishmael brings his daughters. They get hooked up with all the Lehi's boys. Eventually, God tells Nephi, build a boat. They build a boat. They're crossing. Oh, of course, there was the brass ball, that happened. And so, the brass ball showed them where to go. So they start crossing the ocean. And this is the first part where, we start to see just how much of a dick God is, right? This is kind of the first time we really see that. Because they're in the water. Laman and Lemuel, once again, tired of Nephi's preaching, so they tie him up, right? So God decides he's going to play a little game of chicken with, Laman and Lemuel. Yeah. So he causes a storm that's going to kill them all, right? I mean, it's just going on for days and days. And essentially, I'm sure Laman and Lemuel are thinking, well, he's not going to let this ship sink. That would kill Lehi and Nephi and all these people that he says he loves. And God's like, really? You don't think I'll do that? I will kill all of you. I will send that ship to the bottom of the sea, untie him, right? Eventually, Laman and Lemuel realize that God means business. He really is going to kill them all. And so they untie Nephi and get to the promised land safely. And that's fantastic. All right, so they get there, and then, of course, they just keep fighting, keep bickering. Eventually, we're not sure why, but Nephi decides he's got to leave. So he takes his family and chucks on out of there, okay? So, again, that was weird. I don't understand why he had to leave. Maybe they were under threat. It didn't really say. But anyway, so off they go. So now they have two different societies. So the book goes into some detail about how industrious and hardworking and strong and faithful the Nephites were, right? And they created industry and they created forges and they started making metals and fine precious things and all this stuff. And meanwhile, describes the Lamanites as a bunch of lazy bums, right? They just didn't want to work. They kind of wandered around. They're like, whatever, nothing, right? And so lazy that God decided to curse them, makes their skin turn dark. And now everybody knows these are the lazy ones, the lazy dark people, right? Now, what's interesting about that concept, right, is that they never said that, okay, the Lamanites might have been lazy, but they also had industry of their own, right? No, just said that it kind of portrayed them as like nomadic, right? That they were just this wandering hunter-gatherer type of people. Now, if that was true, given even 100 years, but my God, this book covers the span of like 1,000 years, I think, something like that, quite a long time. There's just no way that the industrious society would not completely overpower the nomadic one, right? I mean, we've seen that throughout history time and time and time again. The best example is the European colonization of the earth, right? They were just plain more industrious than the places that they took. And they would walk in, and it's like, oh, you have wooden spears. Yeah, we have muskets, so you lose, right? I mean, that was just that they took the whole world that way. And, so that was always weird. And the Lamanites won. Like, in the end of the day, they eventually won. How were they as, militarily as superior? It just doesn't make any sense. Like, how would they have the metalworking, right? How would they have the what do they call it? Husbandry? Is that what they call, like, raising horses or something like that? Anyway, like, you would have to have several, like, different, infrastructural industries, right? To maintain a proper advanced army. And so I've never understood that part. How is it the Lamanites were able to even have an army capable of competing with the Nephites? Just seems weird. Seems weird if they really are lazy and not industrious and blah. But anyway, that was never explained either. But okay. So I have these two families. They split up, right? Now from here, the story gets weird. And when I say weird, it's because it starts to get really hard keeping up with who is speaking, who is writing. And then the whole time in the back of your mind, you have to remember that this is just an abridgment from Mormon, right? So I mean, we'll get into that later. But for now, Nephi, he gives whatever he's written down, which I assume is like everything that happened in Jerusalem till now, right? Like Nephi was writing down about Lehi's dreams and the whole magic tree and all this stuff. And then he gives his plates that he's written to his son Jacob and says, okay, you keep it up, right? And then this continues for quite a while. So these plates just start getting handed down, right, from generation to generation. And actually, I think I was wrong. Jacob was actually Nephi's brother. Yeah, not his son. Anyway. So Jacob gets them, and then he gives them to his son Enos, who gives them to Jerem, who gives them to Omni, who gives them to Amaron, who gives them to Chemish, who gives them to Abid. Anyway, it goes on and on and on and on, right, for hundreds of years. These plates. So we'll come back to that. But I'm telling you, the keeping up with which plate we're reading and who was writing in it was probably the hardest part about this book. I think it's what makes this book so weird, right? Is this whole concept. So, okay, back to the story. So the other interesting thing is this is also the first time that we get a guy who's basically saying, I mean, whose name isn't Laman and Lemuel, right? That none of this is true. His name is Sherem, right? So he's going around saying this isn't true. Finally, Jacob's like, better stop saying that. And Sherem's like, I'll stop saying it if you give me a sign, which, by the way, is kind of the same exact thing Nephi said, right? Nephi said, give me a sign. God gave him a sign. Sherem asked for a sign, and he gets his sign, but it kills him, right? So he's like, well, I got my sign, but I'm going to die because of it. And so that happened. So great. Anyway, things start happening, right? The different Nephite leaders, they keep being nice and good and loving everybody, preaching to everybody. There's a few skirmishes between the Lamanites, I think. And then eventually we get to this guy named King Benjamin, right? Now, King Benjamin, his main contribution is that for some reason he decided to tell everybody that he had a dream and Jesus Christ is coming, right? He's going to come and save us all from our sins, and tells all the people that up on a tower. And from that point on, the Nephites do not stop talking about Jesus Christ. They will not shut up about it, right? I mean, this just becomes their theme, right? So it all started with old Benji. But then things get really weird, okay? Because Benjamin gives the kingdom to his son Mosiah, right? And then Mosiah adds new plates to the book, right? So he adds the plates of Zaniph and then the plates of Ether, right? So things just get weird. Like, what is this Zaniph story? All right, so let's cover that real quick. So basically, Zaniph and some dudes, they went to the Lamanite king in the land of Nephi. Go figure. Weird. He goes and says, hey, can we just have some cities? And the king's like, sure, have some cities. So anyway, they get these cities, but obviously they're under the subjugation of the Lamanite king, right? That makes sense. So he's not too nice to him. It's unclear as to whether or not they were actually enslaved by the Lamanites, but at a minimum they were paying taxes to him or something. Anyway, so Zaniph's a good king, but eventually his son, King Noah, takes over, and we're supposed to believe that he is wicked, right? I guess he's wicked because he starts getting rich, which is a theme that comes up in this book, right? You don't want to get rich. So he gets rich and starts drinking a bunch, and so he's just not a good king. So then we get the first of God's terrible marketing, right? So God's idea of how to convert a people is just to send in some man in rags from out of town. His name is Abinadi, right? So Abinadi comes in and starts saying, you're all bad. King Noah, you're no good. King Noah doesn't know what to do with him. Keeps sending him to jail. Pull him back out. So back to jail. He keeps preaching, won't shut up. Finally, they just burn him, right? They just light him on fire. And Abinadi on his way out the door has a long speech. I mean, this must have been a slow burning fire, but essentially curses them all and tells Noah, you're next. You're going to burn too, mister. And eventually he does, right? Noah gets burned by his own people, I think. But anyway, but during preaching, he converts one dude, okay? One person that gets converted by Abinadi, and that is Alma, who was originally one of King Noah's evil priests, right? And Alma decides to be a good priest, and he starts his own little cult movement, right? This whole Alma movement. He starts baptizing people and telling everybody Jesus is coming, right? Actually, before that, I think the Lamanites attacked or something. I think that's what killed King Noah, because he told his men to leave their women and children. They didn't want to, so they burned him alive or something. Anyway, the Lamanites are still in charge, if memory serves. Yeah. Anyway, eventually Alma and his people escape into the wilderness and they start their own city. But a bunch of people are still left behind. They get a new king named Limhi, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Ammon shows up, right? And Ammon's just like, hey, let me help you out. So Limhi's all excited about this. And so they basically just get all the Lamanite guards drunk and they just leave. That's pretty much what that happened. And then they go on and on for the rest of the book talking about, do you remember how God delivered us? And I still don't. Right? It was always weird to me because it was just like, no, he just got some guys drunk and walked out, but whatever. They gave God credit for that. But eventually, all of Limhi and his people meet up with Alma and his people, I think, and they're all in Zarahemla now, and they're all being one happy family. So this is just going great. Oh yeah, one other thing. This is also the first time that someone like turns down being king. So they really want Alma to be their king, and Alma's like, no, kings are bad. Don't want anything to do with it. So that's interesting. I'll bring that up later. Anyway, eventually this land in Zarahemla doesn't last long because the Lamanites come in and take it, and they enslave all the people. But the people are still faithful, so God makes them like super happy to be slaves, I guess. And even though they were happy, they still wanted to escape. Weird. But, so yeah, they kind of the same trick as before. When everybody was asleep, they just left. So, off they go. But anyway, at this point in the story, and I'm sorry that the storylines converge a little, Messiah now becomes king, right? That was Benjamin's son. So Messiah's king, he makes, Alma like chief, priest or something. And then, Alma has a son, also named Alma, helpful. So Alma Jr. And, he's no good. He doesn't like God. He's going around telling everybody, what's this Jesus nonsense? And, eventually, God comes down, or an angel or somebody, and gives him evidence, right? Pops up before him, says, quit talking smack about me, knocks him out for 3 days. And so Alma Jr. is converted for life. Quite frankly, I would be too. I think any one of us would, right? So this is another case of getting clear evidence. And, Alma Jr., for the rest of his life, talks to people about how much they need to have faith, which is just nonsense, because he didn't have any, right? He actually got a visitation, but whatever. So that happened. And now we got, Alma Jr., who's, super righteous now, and he's ready to take on the world. Then we have a problem, because, Alma Jr. becomes BFFs with, all of King Messiah's sons, right? And he basically tells them all, hey, got a great idea. Let's go be missionaries to all the Lamanites. And they're like, great idea. Problem is, now there's no one left to be king, right? Because King Messiah's got nobody to give the crown to. He tries, like one by one, he asks all his sons, and they're all like, nope, not it. Yeah, we're doing the Lamanite missionary thing. Sounds way more fun. And so, ends up there's no king, and so they have to go to this system of judges, which, I'll tell you, this is a bad system. Things just pretty much go downhill, and for the government of the Nephites. From that point on, it's just nothing but a steady decline because these judges cannot get anything right. But anyway, that's not really where the story goes. The story next goes to the missionaries, right? This is great. All right, so even though we know that those guys left to be missionaries, we don't hear their stories for a while, right? First thing we do is we get this guy Nehor, right? He's a bad guy. He comes in and he starts telling everybody, there's no Jesus. This is all nonsense. And then eventually, like, kills a priest or somebody. He kills someone important. And then he's put on trial for mainly for preaching against the church, but secondarily for murder, right? Eventually he gets killed. So that's that. And then we get Amaleki. Yeah, so he's basically the first of the, I guess you'd call them kingmen, right? People that prefer monarchy over this, whatever this judgy thing is, which I think you would just call it a theocracy, right? It's probably the best way of describing what these judges are, because they do seem to rule by religious order. But anyway, so we go to, basically this is going to be a long struggle with the Nephites, where they constantly are battling between monarchy and theocracy, which is sad that they never found anything else, but those were their two options, and they just keep fighting about it. Amaleki and his people eventually lose, right? And then, for a while, it seems like this whole judgy system, or I guess the theocracy, kind of works in this commune mentality, right? Like, no one really has property. They're all just supposed to share everything with each other. It's kind of a communal, they all help each other kind of a feel, right? That's kind of how the church is structured at this point in the story anyway. And it never said that changed. So I think we're supposed to believe that this is just how the God wanted the Nephites to live, right? In this kind of a way. No. Now, whether or not we're supposed to assume that means that's how we're supposed to live, well, I don't know. It never gave us anything else. But anyway, so there you go. Now, even though the next part is probably one of my favorite parts of the story, these missionaries to the Lamanites was just fantastic. But I'm just going to breeze by it really fast, okay? So we got all these guys out there. We got Ammon. We got Aaron, right? And they're out there just doing a fine job, right? So they go and they convert a bunch of people. They even convert like the kings of the Lamanites, right? And the ones that get converted eventually come back to live with the Nephites, and they're called Ammonites. No, because Ammon was so good at his job that they become Ammonites. And the Ammonites, they don't like to fight. They just prefer to die. And many of them do. But then eventually they reach this, because they won't fight, and the Nephites are like, well, you can live here. Oh my God, you're not going to defend yourselves? Well, that sucks. Okay, so they reach this kind of agreement where the Ammonites will kind of pay tribute to the Nephites for their protection, right? So the Nephites guard them. Yeah, and that happens. Next, we get Korihor, who's supposed to be an Antichrist, you know, and you remember his story. Not much different than the other two. Just going around saying, none of this is true, none of this is true, and then eventually he's like, he gets evidence that it is, right? Because I think it makes him, doesn't he go mute or something? God eventually just takes his voice away. Yeah, so not very different there either. Anyway, so this goes on and on and on, right? Like many different times. So we have the Zoramites are up next, right? And this time Alma Jr. wants to get in on the missionary action. So he shows up with the Zoramites and he's like, come on now. And you know, they're being mean to the poor people. The poor people join him. He preaches. Anyway, it's just this continual, keep talking to different people, right? No. And then Alma's sons, you know, some are good, some are bad. Eventually they all come around. All that stuff happens. And then we finally get into Captain Moroni, right? So, or I used to call him General Moroni, you know. But anyway, he gets into these, things start to turn when he shows up. Because suddenly it goes from this theocracy to kind of like a military controlled theocracy, right? So the actual, like the army is now kind of calling the shots. And it gets bloody, right? So Moroni puts down his own people quite a bit, right? Anybody that even like wants to talk about having a king instead of judges, dead, right? And this goes back and forth for a while. I mean, we could go back and forth, but there's just lots of battles, right? Back and forth between the Lamanites, just back and forth, back and forth. Eventually he, you know, rips his robe off and makes a flag and calls it a title of liberty and all this kind of stuff. But it just goes on and on with this, right? Just back and forth. You know, he gets, eventually Helaman joins the fight, right? And he's got these 2,000 awesome dudes and they kind of come and go. They can't die, so that's great. And things eventually come to a head when like some judge doesn't send troops fast enough to Moroni, and he's just like, well, that's it. You're all going to die. So, I mean, he kind of solidifies his power there in the whole government. Anyway, so that just goes on for a while. And then all of a sudden we have this weird story about this guy Hagoth who builds a bunch of ships and they just sail away north, and that was the end of it. It was just thrown in there out of nowhere. Anyway, then we have some more missionaries. We have Nephi and Lehi, right? They were sons of Helaman, right? So Alma Jr.'s grandsons, I think, if that's right. Anyway, they get thrown into prison somewhere, right? And they kind of light them on fire, but they don't catch on fire. Or no, God lit them on fire. Anyway, they get miraculously saved. That's great. So a bunch of Lamanites start joining them, right? So now we have like Nephites and Lamanites all at the same time, right? Actually, then we get even more evidence of like, or the people get evidence, right? So like angels come down and tell all the Lamanites that were there, hey, this is legit. Listen to the Nephites. So that's good for them. Then we have this weird like murder mystery that happens. That's kind of fun. I can't really remember who was in it, who wasn't. Caesram? Was that somebody? Or somebody killed Caesram? It doesn't matter. There's a fun little murder trial. You know, somebody was guilty. It was fine. Okay. Nephi gets a bunch of superpowers, which then, he kind of uses to kill his own people. That's pretty weird, right? And then Samuel shows up and he goes and starts preaching to Lamanites more, and nobody can like touch him, right? He's up on the wall. Nobody can get to him. And that got weird. And he keeps coming and going and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, so the story goes on from there. But then all of a sudden you have this awful calamity, right? Suddenly people just start dying, like all over the place. Like cities are getting crushed and swallowed up and flooded and burned, and then all of a sudden everything goes dark for several days. And the next thing you know, Jesus Christ shows up, right? And he just comes down out of heaven, and he pretty much says the same thing that he said in the New Testament, right? I didn't hear anything different. It all sounded pretty much the same, So maybe there was something new that he added, but some of it was just a straight plagiarism, right? I mean, just completely. But he does the whole disciple thing, and everything's fine. And for a while, things are going just fine. And then all of a sudden, this dude, Mormon shows up, right? And Mormon's weird because he's like this 10-year-old dude, and this guy, some dude named Amaron, shows up to him, and he's like, dude, I like hid these records, and in like 14 years you can dig them up and then you can have them. It's a very strange story. And then, but eventually he gets them, and he pretty much writes down, watching the Lamanites, kill everybody, right? Basically. And then, all of his people dying except for his son Moroni. So he writes all that down. And then apparently also just abridged everything. It was weird. But then all of a sudden we get the story of the Jaredites, which I can tell pretty quickly. So Tower of Babel, some people God decides to save one family, right? And he's not going to mess with them. Tells them how to build submarines. They come over to the U.S., not really U.S. They come over to the Americas, right? In their little submarines. And then, one after the other, there's just this civil war among the ruling family. They just can't seem to stop fighting each other. And so they just keep killing and killing until they literally are all dead. Well, so I still don't know what the point of that story was. And then then it ends with Moroni kind of doing a recap, and he, sometimes it was him talking, sometimes he was reading epistles from his dad. But basically we learn, how to do, the sacrament the right way, or communion, right? How to do a proper baptism, and for God's sake, don't baptize any kids. And then it just ends, right? Then that's then he gives us the promise, right? If you ask God this is true, he'll tell you it's true, and then it ends. Okay, wow. That I think I probably missed some really key points there. I know I jumped past certain sections, but if there was just story after story that was kind of the same thing, I just let it go. Just sum that up together. Anyway, I'm sure I missed a bunch of really cool stuff. But for the most part, that's it. Okay. So one thing, let's just say that I believe it all. Let's say that I got the sign, okay? That, somehow I believed all this to be true. All of it. And I'm talking about the beginning. Like even the, Joseph Smith, Moroni coming down, showing him the plates and all that stuff. I accept it all. It's all true. 100%. Okay? Let's just say that happened. So, if that happened, I still, to me, I don't understand why that wouldn't just be a case for any Protestant church. Like really. You know what I mean? Like the book said that there would be this seer, right, that would come, and that was Joseph Smith, apparently, or at least he's making the claim that that was him. And so he translated the plates. Okay. So let's just say that let's say I believe he did it. Okay. Fantastic. And then he stood up and was like, oh, God's still talking to me. I'd be like, wait, Joe, it was awesome that God gave you this gift to be a seer. You could translate this for us. Fantastic. But, I kind of think your work is done here, right? Like, I don't understand how this book gives him authority. Like, he had the ability to translate. Great. That doesn't make you our leader. That doesn't mean that anything else that you say that's not being translated has any credibility. You know what I mean? So, I feel like I could read this entire book, accept it as true, and then walk right into my parents' church, quite frankly. Right? They speak in tongues. They believe in baptism, as an adult, not as a kid. They believe that when you do the whole sacrament thing, that it's not, you're not literally eating blood. It's also symbolic, or eating flesh and drinking blood. All the stuff. Baptism by fire, they always used to say that stuff too. It didn't make sense then either. But anyway, so I don't see what's different. Like really, it would work just fine. Like the only thing that this really kind of separates itself from, very openly, is Roman Catholic, right? So that's where it really diverges, because it makes it very clear. Calls him the whore of the earth. Come on. That's pretty damning right there. But, the whole child baptism thing seems to be pretty focused on that. And don't get me wrong, there are Protestant denominations that still do infant baptism, I think, right? I think it's the older ones, like the more formal ones, like Presbyterian and Methodist and Lutheran and those kind of things. Anglican, probably. Anyway, so they still do it, but any type of more progressive type of Protestantism, you're not going to see infant baptism, right? So this would work just about anywhere. I just don't understand what makes this different, right? And maybe I missed something key, but even when it makes the claim, there's going to be this new church on the earth. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know which one it is. Like, you didn't make a case in here that the Latter-day Saints, whatever they did, or however that happened, has anything to do with this book. It's just even if, again, assuming I believe it all, an angel came to a dude and said, hey dude, this is where you find these plates. Could you please translate them? God wants you to do that. And he asked his dad, and his dad's like, nah, I should probably do what God wants. That seems like a smart thing. So he goes and does it. And he translates it. Done. So I don't know. I don't understand how we get from that to the LDS church. You know what I mean? I'm like, why do they think that must, the A must lead to B? I could probably call those missionary guys that came to my house, call them right now, and I could be like, guys, guess what? Finished reading the book, and turns out I believe it all. 100%. I'm sold. This is 100% true. And they'd be like, awesome. Well, do you want to come down to the ward, or whatever you call those things, whatever the LDS local branch is, come down next Sunday and we'll get you baptized. And I'd be like, wait, no, I haven't. Why would I do that? You know what I mean? Just because I said the Book of Mormon's true. Anyway, I think I'm harping on that point. But that's one thing that strikes me as odd. Like, if someone asked me, what's the difference between the Book of Mormon and the Bible? I would say, different stories, you know, and it makes a case for Protestantism over Catholicism pretty strongly, but that's about it, you know. Even the whole, like, talking about, oh, it sounds like a communist movement or sounds commune. Well, that was in the Bible, too. I mean, read about the very beginnings of the Jerusalem church. Very much like that, right? So anyway, that's the one thing that was surprising. I really did think there would be a lot more of a difference in the doctrine. You know what I mean? Like, the doctrine should have been, I don't know, drastically different in my mind for people to think that this is so special. Because otherwise, it's just, I don't get it. Anyway, so there's that. But the other problem that I think I have with the book as like a historical record is, well, it's just a question of credibility, right? So hear me out. So anytime I am a bit of a fan of history, right? I love to just read up on old stuff that's happened in the world. And, even with especially the further back you go in time, right? When you're looking at the BCE era, you do have to take historians with a grain of salt unless there are multiple accounts from different sources that agree, right? So, for example, most of what we know about ancient Greece comes from a historian named Herodotus, right? Now, Herodotus did a really good job, and I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong. I'm not Greek. I don't know. But anyway, he did a really great job describing, like, the war with Persia, right? I mean, very detailed. But the problem is that nobody else was doing it. He was the only one writing it down. So we only have his perspective, and we also know that he was writing for the Greeks, right? So he says things like the Persian army had 5 million men in it. Well, that's almost certainly not true, right? I mean, historians have looked back and just, is that even possible that 5 million men could cross the Mediterranean in that time, or even hell today, right? So he was probably exaggerating to make their Greek victory look better, right? Okay, that's fine. But again, when you have no other source to compare it to, make sure that you're tempering your lens, right? Well, in that same sense, all we have is this source, right? We have nothing else to corroborate the story, and we know that the only source that we have is the side of the Nephites. Like, we never heard the story from the side of the Lamanites. There's literally not a shred of their writings that survive the ages, right? And it's just the writings of the Nephites. So we have half the story told from one side. So that alone just makes you raise an eyebrow. Like, historically speaking, I don't know that I could really give this a whole lot of credence, right? Even if the plates were still there, even if they still existed, and it could be proven that, yes, this was an ancient writing, even then, right? Even if they could show that this was written back then, this was actually written by local inhabitants of the Americas in, 600 BC to 400 AD, even if you could prove that, and the plates were still there, you still couldn't hold a ton of credence to them because there's no corroboration, right? So anyway, there's that. But even then, that doesn't mean it's not true, right? That just means that there's nothing to back it up being true, right? That's all it really means. So I started thinking about it, and the one thing that always rubbed me wrong about this whole book were these plates, right? So first of all, I'm not aware of any other civilization in history that, like, basically chronicled their activities on plates. Like, I just don't know who else did that. But let's just say that it happened. They're very strange. It's not like there was this one tablet that was translated. There's a bunch of them, right? So of course there were those brass plates, but those don't really count because they weren't really in the book. They were just referenced in the book. But anyway, so they existed. Then you had the plates of Nephi. And according to the introduction of the book, there was 2 different sets. There was like a large set and a small set or something. And, again, people have tried to explain that that's because some of the pages got stolen and you had to redo it. But you know what? The book doesn't tell me that. So I have to assume I don't know that. I'm taking the book at face value. And so, there was like 2 different sets of these plates. But again, they were written over the series of like, I don't know, 2-3 dozen generations, right? So I think I said it before, like from, let's see, Lehi. Well, he kind of started it, even though he didn't write anything down, but it was his thoughts that Nephi was writing down. And then to Jacob, to Enos, to Jerem, to Omni. I mean, it just goes all the way down, right? You have this weird, and then again, when Amalekite, I always say that wrong. Amalekite, I think, right? When he has them, then suddenly, like King Messiah translates these plates or stone in 2 different places. I'm not sure if ether was a stone or plates. Could be either one. But anyway, he throws that in there. And then he also throws in, actually he doesn't. Then later, the second King Messiah throws in like the record of the Zanif people, right? And I think that was different than the plates of Nephi, I think, because they were referenced as their records. But anyway, whatever. And it just keeps going down and down as he eventually gets to Mormon. Mormon's now sitting here with this big fat pile of records, and he's like, well, I'm just going to abridge this thing, right? And so he does. So right there, when you have this line, and by the way, there were periods during this timeline where we're not really sure what happened to them, right? So it's not even like we have an unbroken line of succession. There are times these plates just kind of disappeared. But here's the problem. Any single person in that line, any one of them, could have been the first. Any one. So, I don't know, let's pick somebody. Helaman. Helaman could have just sat down one day and said, you know what, we all know the legend of Nephi and Laman, right? I'm sure there was some sort of oral tradition, right, that they kind of were aware of them. But he decided just to fill in the blanks. And so he went down and started just making up stories. Yeah, just making them up. Wrote a whole big thing about it. And then gave it to his son and was like, hey, this has been handed down all the way from Nephi way back in the day. Take care of it. He could have. There's nothing stopping him. So any one of these people, every single one of these people on the list, you have to trust, right, that they're not full of crap, right? Every single person on the list. And that's a tall order, especially considering that this book so often talked about people being wicked or just being turned away or their hearts being hard or being stiff-necked, right? I mean, that just happens all the time. So every one of them you have to trust. But let's just say you do. Let's say, all right, fine, I'll give it to them. I'll give all of them that. Fine. You know, you kept these plates and they're perfect and nobody lied. No one did anything like that. Then you get to Mormon, who for some reason wanted to abridge them. And if memory serves, he abridged the crap out of them. Like he wrote down 1/100th of what they were. And anytime someone's abridging, you're going to put your own spin on it, right? I mean, it's almost impossible not to. I mean, so for example, I spent the first half of this episode abridging the Book of Mormon, right? I mean, I did it incredibly fast and just kind of burned through what happened. But essentially that was my abridgment. Now, I'll bet you anything that if you had a, faithful LDS saint or whatever they call themselves, Mormon, right? There you go. If you asked them to do, okay, you have 15 minutes, tell us everything that happened in the Book of Mormon, I'm sure it would sound very different, right? It would probably focus a lot more on the spiritual lessons than the actual story, I would guess. Maybe I'm wrong, but that would be my guess. And so, the abridger, is that a word? Maybe. Anyway, whoever's doing the abridging, the way that they abridge it is going to dictate the way it sounds and the message that comes out, right? Absolutely. Especially all these times where it's actually describing what people were thinking, right? Or the motives for their actions. Like, how would you know that, right? There was no way to know because people will be saying that, person A is writing and they're like, person B did this because, right? And you can't know someone else's motives. So anyway, and we're not sure if that's Mormon inserting that. Like, is Mormon abridging and kind of adding a few tweaks to make it sound good? Like, you know what? I'm going to sum all this up and just say he was evil. You know what I mean? Like, you're abridging something. You're just kind of trying to make it quick. So, I mean, then you have that to get past. And you have this human being that abridged. And nowhere does it say that, like, God steadied his hand and told him what to do or abridge it. This was just Mormon out on his own. Just, all right, we're going to abridge this thing, right? And then Moroni does the same thing with the plates of ether, which, by the way, where did they come from? Right? They were just some like archaeological find that the Nephites found. They're like, here's some weird thing. And Mosiah's like, I'm a seer. Let me see what it says. And he's like, oh, people of Jared. And then Moroni abridges that. And we get the Book of Ether, which, like I said, just seems pointless. So, the whole concept of these plates, there's a lot that you got to swallow to say that whatever Joseph Smith dug out of the ground had any legitimacy, right? Even assuming that Angel told him where to dig them up and he dug them up and he's got them. The odds of those plates actually containing really accurate information is, tiny odds on that, right? I mean, it just seems outrageous. You could go through that many set of circumstances and everything align right. You know what I mean? All of the people in the entire chain doing the right thing. Mormon doing like a perfect abridgment to keep, the spirit of the text perfectly. And then Moroni doing the same thing with ether. And this whole ether plate, wherever they came from, they were somehow blessed. Like, the only way you can get there is if you believe that God was there for the whole ride, right? And he was influencing every single person, what they were writing down and how they were writing it. I mean, so if you believe that, oh no, don't worry. No problem clearing all that up. God did it, right? Okay. If that's true, then God, seriously, there are such easier ways of doing this stuff, right? That's, wow, seems like a really complicated way to get your message across to the earth, right? I mean, it's crazy. It took 1,000 years to even go through the time. Anyway, whatever. But then also, the problem with that argument is that you can use it for anything, right? You can say, I know this is true. Why? Because I believe God made it true. Well, seriously, there is no limit to the number of things that you could say that against. So, yeah, I don't know. For me, that's why I said in the last episode when I was trying the Moroni promise, like, God, you're really going to have to wow me because there's a lot to get past. There's a lot to dismiss. And I wanted to take this episode to kind of walk through what I thought was difficult to dismiss, right? And remember, it is true that I've been listening to Naked Mormonism and I've heard a lot more about the history of the church. And so I do have that perhaps coloring my judgment, right? Knowing some of the dubious past of where this book came from. But for this assessment, I really am trying to just pretend I don't know any of that, right? Just pretend that I don't know anything about the history of where this came from, and just taking the book at its own face value, evaluating its own claims. And I'm left with, I don't know, it's really hard to take seriously. It just is. There's just so many different things that don't add up, right? To make this legit. And then lastly, like I said before, even if I did consider it legit, even if I accepted all that, I still don't know what that would mean exactly. I think it would just mean I'm a Protestant, right? Yeah, or at least some sort of progressive Protestant. I don't know how that makes me a Mormon. Like, I don't know how this book gives Joseph Smith the authority to keep talking after he's done translating, right? I don't get that. It's, I can assume he'd be in high standing. People would take him seriously and be like, oh, God gave you the gift to translate this? Well, I'll listen to you if you're going to have a speech, right? But as soon as he starts talking about like, hey, I'm going to change all the rules because God told me to, I think I'd be like, wait a minute. I thought you were just a translator, right? That would be like, let's say you're at the UN, right? And the Secretary General's up there and he's talking and you got the translator out there translating it for everybody that speaks different languages. And then the translator gets up and starts saying, okay, General Order 272. Everyone would look at him and be like, dude, sit down, right? You don't get to do that. You're just a translator. Anyway, I don't know. But for whatever reason, I wasn't there at the time. Turns out that people still wanted to hear Joseph Smith's original thoughts. And so we're going to be getting into that later, I assume, right? With the Pearl of Great Price and the Doctrines and Covenants. Although I'm not sure. Maybe the Pearl of Great Price is also a translated plate and there's some other plate. I don't know. We'll find out. That's coming up next. Next episode, I'm going to get back to that. Which, by the way, if you didn't like this episode, well, first of all, it's a free one, right? This would be the 5th episode release, and I never, charge the patrons for more than 4 a month. So even if you are a patron, this is a freebie. If you're not a patron, you're a freeloader, so they're all free for you. Just how do you live with yourself, really? I'm kidding. Anyway, so yeah, and the other thing is, I don't know what I'm doing. I really don't. Like, I'm just sitting here talking to myself with nothing to read. So I'm doing my best. And I'm sure that a lot of you are probably like, oh man, we're really hoping you tell us who your favorite characters were. Okay, let me do that. It'd probably have to be, and when I say favorite, I mean, most entertaining parts to read, right? Certainly the early goings on of, Nephi and Laman and Lemuel were pretty entertaining. That was fun stuff. But then after that, I would have to say it's definitely Ammon. Ammon's early missionary days were fantastic, right? Him, murdering people for chasing away flocks and chopping their arms off and carrying the arms back to the king. That stuff was classic. Yeah, that was great. And then probably after that, Captain Moroni, right? Kind of watching him evolve as a military commander, because boy, he was bad at it early on, remember? Actually, in fairness, he was actually quite good at military defense. But yeah, when it came to going on the offense, man, he took a while to figure that out. So that was fun to go on that journey with him. Yeah, those are probably my favorites, I would say. Let's see. People may say, what do you think were the worst parts of the book? This isn't going to be a shock. Just the very obvious racism, that was pretty bad. And then, I've said this before. I've probably said this 100 times, but just the concept of the prosperity gospel or whatever. If you love God enough, you'll get blessed and you'll have stuff. You get stuff if you love God. But then, again, it rubs me wrong because so many people out there are doing their best, but they don't have the stuff, right? And, for them to feel guilty, like it's their fault, sometimes it's just cruel, right? It's just plain cruel. And then in the same token, the book at the end there goes on and on about charity and hope. And, but yet for some reason, God only blesses the people that deserve it. So why would you even help them? I don't like it. Anyway, But yeah, the racism was pretty bad. And I also love, by the way, several people have written into the show and said things that I've criticized in the Book of Mormon were also in the Bible. So people are like, I don't know why you're so upset at the Book of Mormon. The Bible had racist comments here, here, and here. And I'm like, did I ever say that I was endorsing the Bible? Right? I could read that thing too and tear it apart if you wanted me to. Yeah, somebody else is already doing that. And thank goodness, because it's much longer and there are parts much more boring than this book. But anyway, yeah. So that, that argument doesn't work with me. Just because something else is equally as bad doesn't make this good. Two wrongs don't make a right, Anyway. So yeah, what were some other things people wanted to know? I don't know, just, that's pretty much all I have to say about this book. I tried to take it seriously. There's certainly parts of it that were entertaining. There are parts of it that were just plain weird. Like the timeline jumped around quite a bit at times. And, the characters were hard to keep track of. I really did try my best to keep track of all the characters and, who was good and who was evil. That changed quite a bit too, right? You'd never really sure, are the Lamanites good in this chapter? And then you'd find out that no, the last chapter said that all the Lamanites were good now, but we meant some of them, right? So you were never really sure. But all in all, it was fun to read. I think it was probably more fun because I knew you guys were listening. Like if I were doing this completely on my own, I don't think it would have been nearly as entertaining. But you guys made it fun. You made it an awesome ride. And for that, I thank you. And I look forward to continuing on this journey. So, yeah, hopefully this episode wasn't a disappointment. If there are very specific things that you want to know, or if you think that I rushed through the end, like the abridging, like if you guys actually want to hear me do here's an actual summary, like a Cliff Notes episode, like an episode that's nothing but the Cliff Notes of the Book of Mormon. So if somebody just wanted a quick catch up, I could probably just sum it up in an hour. I think I could do that. It'd be kind of boring, I think, for people that, know what's in it. But anyway, I don't know. Maybe that's something I could do and just kind of have it as a reference. Because, there really are people out there like me that want to know what's in the Book of Mormon that are just never going to get around to reading it or listening to 72 hours of someone read it, right? There's never going to get around to that. So maybe that would be a good public service to do. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, I guess I'm going to wrap it up. And when I return, I will be coming back with The Pearl of Great Price. That's right. Very excited to read it. People have told me that I'm going to like it. This one takes crazy to the next level, and I'm very excited about that. Hope I won't be let down. People said that about Ether too. And the submarines were fantastic. Don't get me wrong, that was great. But then after that, boy, Ether took a serious downhill in terms of readability. It got pretty boring after that. Anyway, so that's it. Like I said, if anyone has any specific questions that you don't think I addressed during this episode, let me know. But I just kind of wanted to make sure everyone understood, kind of reiterate why I did this in the first place, and specifically what I was never intending to do, right? And then kind of where I sit on the whole, my worldview, right? What I think is real and what isn't. And, then I just wanted to give you my views on the Book of Mormon as itself, the book all by itself. So hopefully I did that. Hopefully I accomplished what I was trying to do. And again, sorry if this was a very disjointed episode. I really don't know what I'm doing. And when I tried to force it, when I tried to organize it and structure it, it didn't come across, it didn't sound like me. I'll just say it that way. Didn't sound like me. I didn't record more than 5 or 10 minutes and I just stopped and I'm like, this is not the show. Right? So, I went back and did it again. Anyway, okay. Enough babbling. Can't wait to come back and start reading again because that's what the show is about. And, that's what you guys tune in for. So next time you'll be, joined with David Michael with the reading of The Pearl of Great Price. Looking forward to it. So until then, thanks for everything. Keep being awesome. Love the Mimos. And goodbye.
This song is licensed for use within this podcast. All song and copyright information can be found at www.mybookofmormonpodcast.com.